The year is 1944. World War II is entering its final stages in Europe. Germany's V-2 rocket had been raining down on major European cities for months when the German military was finally defeated. The Allies took the V-2, its technology, and its creators into American custody. Over the next few years, hundreds of German scientists were brought to the United States for employment after the war during Project Paperclip, including Wernher von Braun, who later created the Saturn V rocket that took American astronauts to the moon. An arms race quickly appeared between the Soviet Union and the United States after the war. As soon as the early 1950s, both countries started launching missiles to be the first to establish a leading role in space exploration.
America set to work establishing their own space program, and NASA stepped up to the challenge. The first flights were flown by animals: dogs for the Soviets, chimpanzees for the Americans.
Sputnik, the world's first satellite, launched in late 1957. It emitted radio beeps that were easy to pick up by home radio and could be seen passing through the night sky from the ground. Americans had looked down on the Soviet Union for so long that Sputnik's success caught them completely by surprise.
Eventually, both countries led up to a launch with a man inside. Only 30 days before NASA sent up the first astronaut from their Mercury program, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space with his 108-minute flight. Remaining on schedule but settling for second place, Alan Shepard became America's first man in space during a 15-minute flight.
Not even a month after Shepard's flight, President John F. Kennedy made an announcement that changed millions of lives.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
5 more single-man Mercury flights followed Shepard, starting with Gus Grissom, then John Glenn, who did the first American orbit, then Scott Carpenter, Wally Schirra, and lastly Gordo Cooper with a flight that lasted 34 hours. To reach this goal on time, NASA needed to pick up the pace. Mercury had ended in 1964 and a new program, Gemini, was only getting started. Unlike Mercury, Gemini had a 2-man capsule and a stronger bolster.
Gemini 3 in 1965 was the first Gemini flight with Mercury veteran Gus Grissom piloting it. Gemini 4 was planned to be the first spacewalk, but again, the Soviet Union beat America to the punch with Alexei Leonov's spacewalk in March 1965. Ed White became the first American to walk in space in June.
Each Gemini mission was trying new things, each one a little longer and a little harder. Gemini 7 spent 14 days in orbit and rendezvoused with Gemini 6 to establish knowledge on how to get to the moon. Gemini closed with Gemini 12 in 1966, ultimately a success. NASA had the knowledge and the information to get to the moon. NASA's next program would finish the job. A new 3-man capsule along with a 2-man lunar module would allow the United States to land on the moon. A new rocket developed by NASA's Gemini scientists would take them there.
On January 27th, NASA's knowledge failed them. The crew of Apollo 1, consisting of Gus Grissom, a Mercury and Gemini veteran, Ed White, America's first spacewalker, and Roger Chaffee, a rookie, were killed in a fire that erupted in their capsule during a simulated launch test run a few weeks before their launch. A spark from bad wiring under Grissom's seat was the cause, and in a 16 psi 100% oxygen environment with meters of Velcro stuck all around the inside of the capsule, the crew was dead in under 15 seconds.
As the crew members were buried, as the nation mourned, and as Congress pointed fingers, Apollo was shut down. For almost 2 years, NASA scrapped and redesigned the Apollo capsule. In late 1968, NASA returned to the flight on Apollo 7.
Apollo 8 flew the first lunar orbital mission. For the first time ever, man looked upon the surface of the moon from only 60 miles above. They saw the famous Earthrise and were the first humans in history to see the dark side of the moon. Apollo 8 was launched on the enormous Saturn V rocket, which stood at 363 feet tall, and is still the largest rocket man has ever built to this day. Apollo 7 and 9 were launched on the Saturn 1B rocket, which had a smaller first stage as they did not go to the moon.
At last, Apollo 11 landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969. America had completed Kennedy's challenge even though he did not live to see it. Apollo 12 landed successfully on the moon 4 months after 11, and the ill-fated Apollo 13 had to abort their landing due to an oxygen tank explosion that tore off half of their spacecraft. Apollo 14 commanded by the first American man in space, Alan Shepard, landed in early 1971, followed by Apollo 15 in mid-1971, Apollo 16 in mid-1972, and finishing up was Apollo 17 in December of 1972.
Apollo 11 spent 2 hours walking on the moon. Apollo 17 stayed for 3 days. Just a little over 2 years of brief exploration of our closest neighbor changed centuries of theories. Everything we knew about the moon had to be rewritten, rethought out, and redrawn. Science textbooks were rewritten with newly discovered information from Apollo, and a new generation of scientists and explorers grew up.
At long last, the space race was over. The United States had beaten the Soviet Union and completed Kennedy's challenge. Just like the United States, the Soviet Union had had their drawbacks and it also had accidents that costed them their cosmonauts' lives. But as they fell behind, America surged forward. The combination of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo had triggered a new era where anything was possible. It wasn't just America, it was the whole world who could now say, "We did it."